I'm delighted to introduce David Sirota here. And climate change is many things, and until recently it was not hilarious. But your work has sort of challenged that, and you look at the cast that is in the movie, the people who are behind it. I don't know whether to ask, like, how did this movie get made, or how did this movie not get made, given the passions and personalities involved? I mean, how did it not get made for so long?
How did this movie get made? Sometimes I wonder that. Because the storyline is, I mean, the way the movie ends, hopefully lots of people have seen the movie. The way the movie ends was, we were a little bit nervous about the way the movie was going to end, in the sense of how would people react to it. I can say that from the beginning, when we started coming up with this idea, I was skeptical that it would ever actually get made. Adam McKay, the director and screenwriter of the movie, when we were spitballing the first ideas, he was really excited about it. But I was sort of like, yeah, I mean, it would be great if this movie got made, but I don't think a movie that necessarily has this message is actually going to find a place to be made. And to his credit, I mean, he used his position in Hollywood to push it forward, and then a number of the cast members who have a huge amount of influence and can get things made, particularly Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, they signed on really early, and then it was kind of off to the races. So I've said this before, I'll say it again. I am so grateful that they used their influence to make a movie, by the way, a movie that I think was going to inherently be not a consensus movie. It was going to be a controversial movie. And I think a lot of people in their positions sometimes want to be risk averse. So I really appreciate that they actually used their star power to do something that they knew would create a lot of discussion, positive and negative.
So, I mean, it's a ancient question. Like, what is art about? Is it like, what comes first, the message or the story? And like, how does that apply here? What came first, the mission or the message? Or the message or the story?
Well, it was after the movie Vice, Adam McKay's movie about Dick Cheney, came out. He and I were talking, and I said, you really have to use your special talent for mixing politics and comedy for something about the climate crisis. And he said, yeah, I've been thinking about how to do that, and I just haven't been able to figure out how to do that. I don't want to do a kind of Mad Max post-apocalyptic movie showing a kind of hellscape on Earth. I want to do something, but so how do we actually do this? And a couple weeks later, I had written something about the climate crisis, reported something, and I said, I don't know why these stories, they don't land. Why don't they have more cultural and political impact? And I said, it kind of feels like an asteroid is headed towards Earth and nobody cares. And a couple days later, he said, I haven't been able to really stop thinking about that idea. I wonder if that's the movie. And then we started spitballing scenes and the like, and here we are. So I guess that's a long way of saying, I think the message came first. That he was, and I think a lot of people were looking for a way to tell a piece of the story of climate change, and we kind of stumbled into it.
And so did it land, and who did it land with, and what did you imagine the impact would be? Like, can you draw a line from this movie to anything anyone has done to fight climate change, forward policy, whatever the activity might be?
So I definitely think it landed in the sense that I haven't, I've been involved in two things that had, I would say, above 95% cultural recognition. I was involved in the Bernie Sanders 2020 presidential campaign as his speechwriter, and every single person in America, I think, basically knew who Bernie Sanders was. So you could, if that came up in conversation, everybody would know that. And then this movie, I think, I'm not sure, I don't know if most people have seen it, but certainly it's got a name ID of lots of people know it. I mean, I didn't realize that, by the way, until I was in a UPS store and I was mailing a poster to somebody from the movie. I think I was mailing a poster to my parents, and as I couldn't get the poster in the roll, and I kind of took it out in the middle of the store, and like everybody in the store got all excited about, well, you were involved in that movie. So it was like, wow, this movie really gotten out there. So I think, yes, I think it landed. And I think when you see politicians, when you see the media refer to the phrase "don't look up" or a play on that, they're referring to it as shorthand for something that that it means that they know that everybody knows what it is. Has the movie made, impact, pun intended or no pun intended? I think, look, there was a march in France where 80,000 people came out for the Just Look Up rally. I think, I guess I would say this, there's no specific policy in the movie that the movie is prescribing. The movie's impact is to try to grab the culture by the lapels and say, we have a serious communication problem here. So I would like to believe that the movie the impact is hopefully psychological. Like, and to be clear, I think lots of people saw the movie as a pandemic allegory. And I think ultimately at the base of the movie is actually about whether we can, as a society, process in a constructive way verified science. Or are we so captured by a political war, a cultural war, a media war, that facts are now just in service of those wars as opposed to things that we act upon? And I actually think that's why the movie did so well, because I think whatever your position on what we should do about the climate crisis is, or whatever your position about what we should have done about the pandemic, I think you can, hopefully most people can recognize the fundamental truths in the movie about our broken system of communication.
There's a real, as absurd as it is, I'm just idly curious in the room how many people have seen Don't Look Up. A fair number of people have seen it. And one of the things that stayed with me and that I think about quite frequently is how absolutely absurd every last thing is. Obviously, I mean, I think the point. But also there's this very real psychological realism that still gets through. And there's a scene where a very top-ranking army general goes and gets chips for the main characters and charges them $10 for snacks. Yeah. And that in itself is absurd, but like 3/4 of the movie later, the characters are still like, the comet is bearing down on Earth. They can look up and see it. Yeah. And she's still laying on the roof thinking, why did he charge for free snacks? Yeah. And it's just like...
People love that joke, though, by the way. The people love that joke.
Yeah. It's because like even the person at the heart of the drama who brought this risk to everyone's attention is still so trapped in her Neolithic brain that she just can't figure out the snacks, even though, you're going to die, and you're going to die, and you're going to die. And I think the question there is, climate people, whether they're activists or corporates or government people, are more tightly wrapped around how to talk about climate change than just about like anybody in any other field of life. And I wondered how a movie that's so unconventional, like both adhered to and rejected, these obsessive level struggles that people have every day to figure out how to talk about climate change. Like what worked, what didn't work, what could you make fun of, what couldn't you make fun of, because it turns out, well, that's actually kind of a serious thing.
The reason, I mean, everybody can see what they want to see in the movie, and why do we put different things in the movie? And I look at the general joke as a way to acknowledge, as us, makers of the film that we are all in this bubble. That in other words, the movie is not saying, we the filmmakers are better than the viewers, or that the public is somehow stupid. It's to acknowledge the fact that even if we are mindful of the crises in front of us, we are all still in this bubble. And I think acknowledging that, I mean, as from a viewer experience, I think it kind of takes the edge off, right? I mean, it's like, hey, we're in this too. I mean, there's another scene where the Dr. Oglethorpe is watching them on morning television, and he's waiting for them to say the comet is headed towards Earth, and yet he's also momentarily getting into this ridiculous drama between the rapper and the singer, and he's excited about it too, which is to say, even the person in the middle of the scientist who's in the middle of the crisis is also a human being. And I think acknowledging that, acknowledges the human condition, but I also think we can acknowledge that we shouldn't be consumed by that. That shouldn't be the be-all, end-all. And I hope the movie, one of the takeaways from the movie is that distractions are a normal part of the human experience. Enjoyment, jokes, little petty human interactions, that's all part of life, but we shouldn't be, that shouldn't become the only thing we focus on. And one other point on the general, I think the other takeaway from that joke, and again, this is a joke that almost every conversation about the movie, people just love that joke. I also think it's a reminder of, and I can say this having worked on campaigns and the like, we have this idea of these people at the top of the political hierarchy, they're so powerful. I mean, there's sort of a deification of these people. And it's also a reminder that they're all just people. And I say that, as I said, I worked for the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I can tell you, having spent a lot of time with that candidate, it is really true. They are all just people.
The metaphor is obviously very powerful, very potent. I wanted to explore it a little bit because it's not an identity, it's a metaphor. And there's important ways where climate change is different than a comet. And probably the most important one is there's a deadline, like it's gonna hit. There's no impact with climate change on a global scale. And in particular, I think that the overall message has been muddled in the last few years because they're just, to like geek out for a second, there's this notion of the carbon budget, and we're running out of time. There's only so much more carbon we can fit in the sky, and there's, there's 10 years left. Like it's incorrect to say there's 10 years left, there's 12 years left. There are countdown clocks that probably serve activist purposes, but again, don't withstand factual scrutiny. And I wondered if did you feel any conflict between the metaphor and climate science, either in that particular way or in any other way that comes to mind?
I think look, I've seen some film criticism, the metaphor is not perfect, and my first response to that is, you're right, it's not perfect. It's a metaphor. Like it is a metaphor. So I think the question then becomes, well, what is the metaphor trying to dramatize? Because if you're using a metaphor, it's like, you're right, something that's not climate change is not climate change, right? I agree with that.
No, everything is climate change.
Yeah. Right. So what I think the metaphor serves as, it speeds up time in comparison to climate change. And I agree with you, obviously, that climate change, there's not one singular explosive impact. So we're trying to dramatize both the time scale and also the cumulative impact in one instant in order to spotlight how irrational our response is to it. Because, yeah, sure, if runaway climate change goes on for 300 years, maybe the Earth isn't gonna, literally blow up, but the Earth, in theory, will be not all that habitable at all, right? And so we said, let's shorten the time frame to 6 months, and let's have it actually explode, to allow viewers to focus the mind on, okay, our response to something that we know is going to happen maybe on a longer time scale, maybe not with one singular explosion. Our response is irrational and problematic.
Was there anything left on the floor that you were like, oh, I wish this long movie was even longer?
You know, to be honest, I wanted a little bit more of like a government shutdown that would prevent, you know, Congress squabbling, that would prevent a response to the asteroid, the comet. There was something that was being debated whether to keep in or not. It was one of my pet points, which was the movie inside of the movie, Total Devastation, which I think was Hollywood essentially us making fun of itself, like scheduling a movie about an asteroid hitting Earth to come out on the day that the actual asteroid was going to hit the Earth. Like, so I fought for that to be, you know, kept in, and we got a great cameo from one of the most famous actors in the world. And frankly, I actually would have liked to have seen more. Before I say this, there's a big debate, I think, among people. Is the president a Democrat? Is it a Republican? You know, it's kind of hilarious. I mean, I've been accused of, oh, you guys created a Hillary Clinton character just to bash Hillary Clinton. Oh, you created Donald Trump to, you know, bash Donald Trump. And, you know, at first I was like, I was kind of frustrated by that. But then I realized, look, if you're confused whether it's Clinton, Trump, or some other politician you like, it's an amalgam of politicians. That said, I would have liked to have seen, and Adam and I have talked about this, like if there was more time in the movie, like how the opposition party would react to the way the president behaved. And you see it for 1 second, where the senator says, you know, we're going to hold censure hearings on this ridiculous Supreme Court. But I would have, court nominee, I would have liked to have seen more about how feckless the likely congressional response would have been as a metaphor for the way Congress and the president deal with each other. And too often, in my view, Congress defers to the president on things like this.
Where did your critics surprise you, and where were they right?
I think the surprising thing to me about some of the criticism was that, well, one, that, you know, it's not a perfect metaphor. I'm like, you know, that I don't even know how to, it's kind of annoying. It's like, it's not a perfect metaphor. So that was kind of surprising. There was a moment when the movie came out where Adam McKay had said something to the effect of, listen, I'm glad that there's a big debate about this this movie. And he said something to the effect of, you know, I will say, if you don't think climate is a problem at all, I'm not sure you're going to fully appreciate the movie. And that was twisted in a really nasty, dishonest way to portray him and us as saying, if you don't like our movie, you must be a climate denier, which of course is ridiculous. We would never say that. Like, people have a right to like or hate our movie, and also that's not a reflection of whether you believe in climate science or not. I think the thing that was, I guess it shouldn't be surprising to me, but it almost felt like we were in the movie itself, in the way the movie distorts reality. And you see this distortion of reality, that you can say one thing, and then it can kind of get excerpted on social media and turned into something. I mean, literally, and then there was like headline after headline of like, you know, the filmmakers are saying you're climate deniers if you don't like our movie. And at first I was like laughing at it, and then I was like, I feel like I'm in the movie. Like, I don't even know how to, and the more you try to debunk, that's what then you're creating more controversy. I mean, I should have known that from having worked on, you know, campaigns. So that's a long way of telling you what I was surprised at. I think, very quickly, you know, what were the critics, what point did they have? I mean, I thought it was an interesting point. I saw some criticism that and it sort of falls into it wasn't a perfect metaphor, but I think there was something to it, which is that in the movie, the president really does have the singular sole instant authority to stop the crisis. And I think when it comes to climate, I think the president has a ton of power to put in place the policies that begin mitigating the crisis. But I think that, that is fundamentally different. But that said, so I thought that's like a fair point. That said, I think like when we look at what Joe Biden is doing right now, I also sometimes feel like we're in the movie. It's a president who goes out and says the right things about the proverbial comet, and then doesn't expect anyone to follow up and see that he's doing the exact wrong things to stop the comet.
I wanted to ask you about that in just the 2 minutes we have left, about solutions. Like, the movie itself is, I guess there's a big solution at the end, but what would have fixed that world, or if you draw a distinction between that and our own?
I think what would have fixed that would be, first, a media system that takes the crisis seriously, stops focusing on distracting people.
Let me tell you about Bloomberg Green.
Right. Stops focusing on distracting people, stops focusing on comforting everybody all the time, like, hey, everything's going to be okay, you just put your head down and don't pay attention. That, in theory, would have created more political pressure to actually seriously deal with the crisis. There was a delay at the beginning, and then obviously there was a choice at the end. So I think those are two things. I think also underneath this ideology that every crisis can be an opportunity to profit, and that every crisis presents a chance to be a win for billionaires and corporations and also the rest of the world. I think that ideology is eating away at our society, that there are zero-sum choices, that you have to, in many cases, make a choice. Somebody wins, somebody loses. The fossil fuel industry wins, we all lose. There is no middle ground with the fossil fuel industry continuing to make huge profits and the world surviving in the way that it is today. And politicians who take lots of money from fossil fuel companies, and in my view, media companies that take lots of money from fossil fuel companies, do not want to admit that, because that would then have to admit the truth that somebody is going to have to win and lose. There is no win-win solution for everybody. And so I think if that ideology didn't exist in the movie, through that Mark Rylance character, I think the argument would be that the government would have gone through with what it should have done to stop that crisis earlier on.
What is next for David Sirota? Tell us about The Lever and in your next movie.
So The Lever at Lever News, for folks who are watching, it's our independent media outlet. We do investigative journalism, follow the money, and we don't always accept that there are win-win solutions. There are good guys and bad guys. So if you like that kind of reporting, check us out. I've got a couple scripts and projects that are out there that deal with politics and in a kind of narrative fashion. And the last thing I'll say very quickly is, one thing that I've learned is that the power of storytelling in this is just so important, that part of the reason why it's important to have cultural products that tell a story of characters is because that's humans through thousands of years have learned to learn things through those stories. So I'm trying to think more about how to mix sort of journalism and important public, accountability efforts with storytelling.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to your next moves.
Thank you.